I have always taken pride in restoring old motorcycles. It is not just a hobby, it is a passion. After a long day in the dreary environment of a law firm, dealing with paperwork and negotiations, the workshop is my haven. Full of the smell of oil, greasy tools, and classic rock from an old speaker. Every night, I put on my worn leather gloves, roll up my sleeves, and immerse myself in the mechanical symphony of gears and metal. Recently, I've been spending my spare time fixing up my 1969 Harley-Davidson motorcycle. It's a beast of a machine, and it took me months to get it right. That week, I was almost done. Just a few adjustments, a final polish, and it would be roaring again. One Friday evening, my wife, Amber, walked into the garage with a steaming cup of coffee, and I barely noticed her. "Anthony," she said with a gentle smile, "I'm going to Kara's bachelorette party tomorrow. Remember? I told you about it." I nodded, not looking up from the exhaust pipe I was working on. Amber and Kara had been best friends since high school. Whenever their schedules permitted, they usually spent the weekends together. I didn't think much of it. Saturday morning arrived, and Amber left early. She was dressed in casual jeans and a loose sweater, her hair pulled back into a neat bun and her face lightly made up. I kissed her cheek, watched her drive off, and then returned to the garage. The day passed quietly amidst the clinking of tools and the smell of gasoline. Time passed unnoticeably until the sun fell through the garage window. I decided to stretch my legs and go inside for a break. I put a cup of coffee in the microwave to heat it up and noticed that Amber's cell phone charger was sitting on the kitchen counter. It was an old charger that she rarely used, but what caught my attention was the faint imprint of foundation on the charger cord. Strange, Amber was always meticulous about her things, especially when she went out for events. I just let it go. Maybe she was in a hurry that morning. That night, Amber came home with a flushed face and showed me the photos from the day while laughing. A group of women were posing for selfies around cocktails, grinning under the neon lights. Everything seemed normal until one photo caught my eye. In the background, I saw a huge window. Through the window, you could clearly see the sea. As far as I knew, the party was supposed to be at Kara's, right in the city center. Where was this taken? I asked casually. "Oh, that's funny," Amber said with a smile. "After spending some time at Kara's, one of the girls suggested we go to the beach bar. It was a casual idea, and Kara agreed. So we went. It was actually quite fun." Her explanation made sense. The photo confirmed her story, and her smile was genuine. I didn't pursue it. I'm not the kind of person who likes to dig too deeply. A week passed, and I hardly thought about it anymore. But then one day, on a quiet Sunday morning, Amber announced that she was going to the grocery store. She grabbed the keys, kissed me goodbye, and disappeared behind the door. A few hours later, she wasn't back yet. Finally, I decided to give her a call. She didn't pick up. A few minutes later, I received a text message, "Sorry, honey. The checkout line was really long. I'll be home soon." Everything seemed fine until I walked past the door and noticed Amber's favorite green handbag hanging on its original hook. It was the bag she never left home without when she went shopping at the supermarket. I stared at it for a long time, my mind full of questions. If she didn't have this bag, what was she carrying? When Amber finally returned, carrying a lot of groceries in her arms, I casually asked, "Didn't you bring your green bag?" "Oh," she replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I was in such a hurry that I only grabbed my little bag. It's still in the car." Do you want me to get it for you? No, I said flatly. Although the nagging feeling wouldn't go away, I let it pass. Maybe I was just being paranoid. People forget things all the time. On Wednesday evening, as I prepared to go to the garage, I was getting my coat in the hallway closet. That's when I saw a light gray hoodie draped over Amber's clothes. The clothes were obviously male, and I immediately knew it wasn't mine. The clothes still smelled of the cologne I had just sprayed, and the sleeves were crumpled as if someone had just folded them. I took it out and held it up. It wasn't the style Amber's brother would wear. It looked newer and cleaner, without the typical wear and tear of his clothes. Still, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I walked into the living room and Amber was lying on the sofa. "Whose hoodie is this?" I asked. Amber barely batted an eyelid. "Oh, it's my brother's. He left it here when he came over last week. I was going to give it back to him." Her answer was quick, almost rehearsed. But something didn't add up. The style of the hoodie didn't match her brother's, and the cologne didn't smell like his favorite brand. Amber continued to scroll through her phone, as if she had already ended the conversation. I stood there holding the hoodie, feeling an inexplicable chill spread down my spine. For weeks, little things had been nagging at me. Cosmetics on the charger, a seascape in a photo, a forgotten handbag, and now the hoodie. None of these things were in themselves enough to constitute a conviction, but taken together they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. And then I realized, this is the beginning. I can't just look away or ignore it. Whatever happened, I have to find out. Trust me, what I find will blow your mind. I never jump to conclusions. I'm a very logical person and believe in facts over speculation. I've always prided myself on not being paranoid in my life. But lately, too many small details have come together to form a picture I can't ignore. Traces on the charger, suspicious photos on the beach, hoodies in the closet, and a forgotten handbag. Each item in itself is meaningless, but put together they make me uneasy. Amber mentioned that she was going to her usual yoga class on Saturday. Nothing unusual about that. She had a regular schedule and yoga was a regular part of it. But that morning, I sensed something was wrong. She spent an unusual amount of time selecting her workout clothes and carefully applied makeup, which seemed unnecessary for a yoga class, and even stuffed a small cosmetic bag into her gym bag. I quietly noted these details and said nothing as she kissed me goodbye and left. As soon as the car door closed, I grabbed my jacket and keys. I didn't want to confront her head-on. I just wanted answers. I jumped in my old pickup truck and started following her, keeping a discreet distance. For a while, everything seemed normal. She took the familiar route, stopping at red lights and turning into streets I knew well. But then my truck let out the familiar shrill screech, a noise I knew all too well. The transmission had broken down again. Before I knew it, the truck stalled at the intersection. The horn blared, angry drivers swerved past me, and by the time I finally got the engine running again, Amber was gone. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel, my frustration churning in my chest. A few hours later, Amber returned. She had her yoga mat slung over her shoulder, a smoothie in her hand, and the after-class smile on her face. She mentioned casually trying some new poses and joked that she didn't feel flexible enough. I nodded in agreement, playing the part of the understanding husband, but something told me something was off. The following week, Amber mentioned that she was going to have dinner with friends at a new Italian restaurant in the city center. She showed me their text conversation, and even took a selfie in front of the mirror in an elegant dress before leaving. I told myself that I would not make the same mistake as last week. I got into a taxi, told the driver the address of the restaurant, and arrived at the same time as Amber. I found a table by the window, ordered a drink, and kept my eyes on the entrance. Soon, Amber walked in. She was with her friend, the person she said she wanted to meet. They sat by the window, sharing a bottle of wine, eating and laughing. Everything seemed normal, no secretive eye contact, no secret handshakes. After dinner, they walked out of the restaurant together, called separate taxis, and drove off. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Amber came home radiant, still talking about how delicious the pasta was and how good it felt to catch up with friends. I relaxed my nerves. Maybe I had overreacted after all. But the third thing was something I hadn't expected. Amber told me she was taking a day off for herself, what she called a self-care day. Shopping, a manicure, being alone in the city. It didn't sound like it would do any harm, so I told her to enjoy herself. But deep down, I wasn't happy about it. Instead of sitting at home waiting, I decided to go into the city on my own. I parked a few blocks from the main shopping area and started walking. I walked slowly, blending in with the crowd, keeping an eye out for Amber. After an hour or two, I found her. She was standing on the corner, wrapped in a coat, her hair disheveled, her phone in her hand. She wasn't window shopping or fiddling with her shopping bags. She was waiting for someone. Soon, a man appeared. He was tall, wearing a dark overcoat, and had a few days' worth of stubble on his chin. He casually walked up to her, and the two of them started talking. Their conversation seemed relaxed and casual, with a familiarity that strangers don't share. At one point, he lightly placed a hand on her shoulder. Amber smiled, gently pushed his hand away, and laughed at something he said. They stood there for about 10 minutes. Apart from the brief contact on the shoulder, there were no other dramatic movements or physical intimacy, but the relaxed atmosphere between them alerted me. Eventually, they parted ways. Amber walked into a nearby salon, while the man disappeared into the crowd. I stood transfixed for a few minutes, digesting what I had seen. On the surface, their interaction had not crossed any lines. There were no obvious signs of betrayal, no definitive things that could be pointed to and said, "That's it. That's the proof." But instinctively, I knew the story didn't end there. That evening, Amber returned home refreshed, her steps light, shopping bags in hand, and showing off her freshly manicured nails. When I asked her how her day had been, she gave a relaxed smile and said, "Oh, it was perfect. Shopping, coffee, a manicure, just what I needed." I nodded, letting the conversation turn to other topics, but inside I was full of questions. Who was the man? Why did their interactions seem so intimate yet careful? Most importantly, how long had this been going on? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I also didn't want to let it go. Things were starting to come together, and whether Amber realized it or not, I was beginning to see the bigger picture. Now, I had a reason to continue digging. I needed to know who this person was, what their relationship was, and what was really going on when Amber wasn't home. Because one thing was clear. This wasn't over, and I wasn't going to let it go. I'm not paranoid. I've always considered myself a rational, level-headed person who doesn't jump to conclusions without evidence. But lately, the nagging sense of anxiety in my head has grown stronger. Every little detail, every strange coincidence, is like a piece of a puzzle, putting together something bigger, something I just can't see yet. I know I can't take this on alone anymore. I need someone to help me analyze it, and more importantly, I need someone to support me. That Saturday night, I called Tom, Larry, and Jeff, my oldest and most reliable friends. They were not only drinking buddies, but also people I trusted. They arrived at my garage with 6 beers, light-hearted banter, and curious expressions. We sat on the worn-out stools around the workbench, and I told them everything. "Guys," I said, gripping the wrench to keep myself calm, "I'm not losing my mind, but something's not right. There are too many things that don't add up: the charger, the hoodie, and the fact that I saw her downtown with that guy. I can't ignore it anymore." The 3 of them listened intently, exchanging glances from time to time, as I explained to them every strange detail, every lingering doubt. Tom, the most well-connected of the group, with his endless network of contacts, was the first to lean forward. "Let's start with this man," he said. "You said he was tall, dark-haired, had a 5 o'clock shadow, and was wearing well-cut clothes. I'll make some calls and see if anyone knows someone who fits that description." Over the next hour, we went over every detail of this person's description. I even sketched a rough drawing on a scrap of paper, not my best work, but enough to give them a general idea. Larry grabbed his phone and started going through his contacts, making calls, while Jeff texted local groups and mutual friends. They made call after call, but to no avail. No one could identify the person based on my description. Tom eventually leaned back in his chair, frowning. "If he's a local, someone from our circles, someone we see in town a lot, someone should know him by now. Either this person is very low-key, or they're new to town, or there's someone who knows how to hide themselves." His words made me feel uncomfortable, but he was right. We were at an impasse, and I hated the feeling of being at a loss. But we couldn't give up. The following week, we decided to change our strategy. Larry and Jeff suggested following Amber the next time she went out. I didn't want to drive behind her. I didn't trust myself not to be noticed. So they took Larry's old station wagon, which was inconspicuous and wouldn't raise anyone's suspicions. Amber had an uneventful day. She drove to the mall, shopped in a few stores, had coffee in a small cafe, and even went to the nail salon. No secret meetings, no mysterious men waiting in dark corners. She acted perfectly normally. When they returned in the evening, Larry shrugged and handed me the coffee cup from the cafe that Amber had been to. "Are you sure she's hiding something, Tony? Because today she looked just like every other woman in the mall. Shopping bags, coffee, manicure, the works." Jeff nodded in agreement. "If she is hiding something, either she's a very good actress or she doesn't meet up with him every time she goes out." I thanked them both, but deep down, I couldn't let it go. Amber was smart, smarter than most people gave her credit for. If she was hiding something, she wouldn't let it be easily discovered. The turning point came, an opportunity, as if fate had thrown me a bone. One night, I was driving home after picking up some motorcycle parts from a friend in town. As I turned into a quiet downtown street, I noticed 2 men arguing on the sidewalk. One of them immediately caught my attention. Dark jacket, stubble, well-dressed. It was him. I had seen him with Amber. The other man was tall and stocky, with red hair, and I couldn't make out his face at first. Their argument quickly escalated. The voices grew louder, the fists tightened, and then the red-haired man delivered a hard punch that sent the well-dressed man crashing to the ground. My instinct was to run away. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures from the safety of the truck. The red-haired man stared down at the man on the ground for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the night. I sat there for a long time, my heart pounding in my ears. The red-haired man's face was familiar. Suddenly it dawned on me. His name was Mike. We went to college together. We weren't close friends, but we belonged to the same circle. I hadn't seen him for many years. The next morning, I found Mike at an auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. He was covered in oil, wiping his hands on a rag, and his face lit up with surprise when he saw me walk in. "Anthony," he said, "my God, it's been ages." We shook hands, and I got straight to the point. "Mike, last night you got into a fight downtown with a guy in a dark overcoat. What's going on?" Mike sighed and threw the rag on the workbench. "Tony, this isn't the place for a conversation. Meet me at Joe's bar tonight. We'll have a drink and I'll tell you everything." I nodded, a sharp pain shooting through my stomach as I sensed what was about to happen. Mike wasn't the kind of guy who got into fights with people for no reason. If he was involved in something, there had to be a reason. And if that reason had something to do with Amber or the man in the black overcoat, I was determined to find out what it was. The bar was dark, filled with the smell of old whiskey and fried food. Neon lights flickered over the battered pool table, and the old jukebox in the corner played a faint soundtrack of classic rock. This was the kind of place where people shared secrets over half-empty glasses and whispers. Mike and I sat in the dark corner, our drinks steaming under the harsh overhead lights. He looked serious and tense. Whatever he was going to tell me, it wasn't going to be easy to hear. "Anthony," Mike began, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "The man from the other night, the one I beat up. His name is Alex Haywood." "Yes, I know him. Not well, but well enough." I leaned forward, keeping my expression neutral, but my grip on the table edge tightened. Mike continued, "A few years ago, I was trying to get my garage off the ground. You know, equipment, rent, startup capital. I didn't have any cash, so I started looking for investors. That's when I met Alex. He was a smooth-talking financier, always well-dressed, with a confident smile on his face. He promised to help me raise the money, put together a solid business plan, and solve all my problems." Mike pauses, takes a large sip of his drink, and then sets the glass down heavily. As it turned out, the investor he found backed out at the last minute, but by then I had already invested all my savings in equipment and rent. I later discovered that Alex had even taken his commission in advance, before the deal had even gone sour. He got away with it, while I was left staring at piles of unpaid bills. Mike's voice is full of anger, but it's clear that this is ancient history for him. He's not angry anymore, or at least, he's calm enough to talk about it. "That's Alex," Mike continues, "a manipulator. A man like him can look you in the eye, smile, and still deceive you from the inside out. He has all kinds of identities: dressed-up consultant, life coach, someone who helps others achieve their dreams. But it's all an illusion. He is surrounded by successful clients and beautiful women, and he lives off their attention." These words were like a cold shower, and I was suddenly wide awake. Everything Mike said painted a picture that matched my impression when I saw him talking to Amber on the street corner. But here's the thing. Mike lowered his voice and leaned slightly closer, saying, "He doesn't just play this game for the money. He plays this game for control, for power. Sometimes he crosses the line. My stomach clenched at those words, but I focused on Mike. He had more to say, and I didn't want to interrupt. A few days before the competition, I ran into Alex in a cafe in the city center. He was on the phone, pacing back and forth. He didn't see me at first, so I overheard part of the conversation. "Anthony," he said something about her husband. At that moment, my world seemed to shrink. My jaw clenched involuntarily, and I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't know who he was talking about, but Mike continued, his voice calm and quiet. But he looked nervous. If Alex Haywood is nervous, that means he's in deep. That night, when I saw him again in the city center, I confronted him. I asked him what had happened and what trouble he was in. Do you know what he answered? "Mind your own business, Mike. It's none of your business." Mike frowned slightly, showing signs of disgust. I lost my temper. I shouldn't have, but I did. I swung at him, and then things just spiraled out of control. But I'll tell you this, Anthony. If Alex is involved with your wife in any way, it's not going to be good. He doesn't approach people for no reason, and he's never been a nice person. We were both silent for a long time. The hum of the bar echoed around us, but it felt distant and low. Every interaction, every doubt, every unanswered question came flooding back. Finally, I asked, "Where does he work now?" Mike let out a long breath and leaned back in his chair. "He has an office in the city center, 17 Park Avenue, but he rarely works there. He spends most of his time meeting in fancy cafes and restaurants. If you want to find him, you have to observe. Be patient." I nod slowly, processing the information. 17 Park Avenue. It's a lead. The first solid lead I've had since this mess started. Mike leans across the table and places a firm hand on my shoulder. "Be careful, Tony. Alex is crafty. He's good at covering his tracks and even better at making people suspicious of him. If you're going to go after him, you have to be smart." I nod firmly. "I'm going to Park Avenue. I'm going to find out what happened between Alex and Amber. I won't rest until I get the answers." We sat in silence, and I felt the weight of the pressure. Mike's warning echoed in my head, but another thought lingered. I couldn't get rid of it. Asterisk, how did Alex know about me? How did he know about her husband? More importantly, what was his relationship with Amber? Asterisk, what shocked me most was that he seemed to already know that this had something to do with my wife. But how? One thing was clear. I needed to find out what the connection was between Amber and Alex. Believe me, when I finally pieced together the truth, you would be just as shocked as I was. I couldn't just sit around any longer. After talking to Mike, I was more alert to every detail and took every suspicious point more seriously. The truth was close at hand. I could feel it, but I needed space, time, and freedom of movement without being watched by Amber. I had to be careful and act alone. The next morning at breakfast, I set the scene. "Amber, I'm going to San Diego for a week. It's about the conference. They want me to present our project to the clients. I'll stay in touch, but I'll be back next Friday." Amber looked surprised, but not alarmed. She nodded, gave me a warm smile, kissed me on the cheek, and wished me luck. I packed my bags, loaded them into the truck, and drove away. But instead of heading south towards the highway, I turned left for Tom's house. Tom, Larry, and Jeff were already waiting there. We gathered in Tom's garage and sat around a folding table, which was full of coffee cups and notebooks. The plan was simple but effective. We would take turns following Amber. Tom, Larry, and Jeff would take turns taking pictures, recording every detail, and keeping a distance. I would oversee everything from Tom's house, analyzing every piece of information they brought back. That night, Amber told me on the phone that she was having dinner with a friend. I passed this information on to Larry, who volunteered to follow her. I stayed with Tom, staring at the clock, waiting for Larry's call. An hour later, my phone rang. Larry's voice was low and tense. "She hasn't gone to any restaurant, Tony. She's parked in the parking lot of the Grandatoria Hotel downtown. The room on the third floor is lit up, and she's not alone." I clutched the phone so hard my hand ached. Larry sent a few blurry photos. Amber walking into the hotel in an evening gown, a shadowy figure of a man visible in the upstairs window. "We're waiting here," Larry said. "But Tony, this doesn't look good." They waited for hours. Amber eventually appeared, her hair a little disheveled and her jacket slung over her shoulders. Larry took a few more pictures, then quietly followed her as she drove home. Next time it was Jeff's turn. Amber said she was working late. Jeff followed her car from a safe distance, watching her maneuver through the downtown streets. This time, she ended up at a restaurant, an Italian place where I had seen her meeting friends. But tonight, she wasn't with friends. She was with Alex Haywood. Jeff described it all in detail when he got back to Tom's. They sat in the corner booth, away from the crowd. They leaned in close, brushing his arm now and then with her hand. He smiled, charming her, and when they left, he put his hand on her waist as they walked to his car. Jeff's photographs captured it all: her smile, his hand on her back, their heads close together as they talked. I stared at the photos until they gradually blurred, my jaw aching from clenching so hard. For the third time, it was Tom's turn to follow Amber. She told me she was visiting a distant relative outside the city, but a few hours later Tom called me with the address. "Tony, she's not with her family. She's staying in a beach house just outside the harbor. It's an expensive place." Guess who showed up 20 minutes later? I didn't need him to tell me who. It was Alex. That night, I drove there myself. Tom's car was parked on the side of the road, hidden behind a tree. I pulled up next to him and climbed into the passenger seat. Tom handed me a pair of binoculars. The beach house was lit up from the inside, and a warm, golden glow spilled out through the curtains. Through the gaps in the curtains, I could see Amber. She was sitting on the sofa, holding a glass of wine in her hand. Alex was there too, leaning against the counter, his shirt sleeves rolled up in a casual pose. We waited for hours. They didn't leave. They didn't move. The lights stayed on. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of the car, my boots sinking into the loose sand, and walked up the beach. The cold night air filled my lungs, but it couldn't quell the anger in my chest. I stood there, staring at the house, and I knew that no matter what was going on inside, I wasn't going to just walk away. When the sun rose, I turned around and drove away, back to Tom's house. I sat there, staring silently at the walls, watching the morning light creep up from the floor. By noon, I couldn't wait any longer. I drove home. Amber's car was already in the driveway. I pulled into the street, my pulse steady and my thoughts focused. I opened the front door as quietly as I could and walked inside. The house was silent, and the air was filled with the faint scent of Amber's perfume. I walked down the hallway, my boots barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. The bedroom door was ajar, and light spilled into the hallway. I pushed the door open, and the sight inside took my breath away. I held my breath, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world tilted. I grabbed the door frame to steady myself, my knuckles white. You know what really shocked me? It wasn't just what I saw. It was all the pieces suddenly fitting together. But everything I saw, it was crazy. I stood outside the bedroom door, my hand gripping the frame so hard my knuckles turned white. Amber's voice came through the thin wooden door, light and casual, punctuated by bursts of laughter. She had the speakerphone on and was talking to someone. Sounded like her friend Karen. Karen, I swear, I can still feel the pain. Mike's 12-inch cock was really something. To be honest, I might need to see a doctor. Her laughter rang in my head like a shrill crack of thunder. My chest tightened, and my stomach felt heavy, weighing me down. I should have rushed in and asked what was going on, but I froze. Alex is so sweet, Amber continued. But Mike, oh, Mike, you should have seen them fighting over me. Alex almost broke his nose and Mike almost broke his wrist. All because of me. Can you believe it? I felt sick. Her words pierced me like shards of glass and made me dizzy. She continued, completely unaware that I was behind the door. And the best part? Anthony has no idea. He thinks I'm a perfect little wife. Oh, Karen, if you could see the look on his face when he finds out the truth. I took a step back, my breathing rapid and shallow. I fumbled for my phone and hit the record button. I recorded every word, every malicious chuckle, every smug comment. I didn't storm into the room. I didn't confront her. Instead, I turned and walked away, out the back door into the cold night air. My hands trembled as I climbed into the truck and started the engine. I had no destination in mind, just a need to get away from the house and her. I drove to Tom's house and pulled into the driveway. My body felt like it was using its last ounce of strength, and my mind kept replaying Amber's words. Tom opened the door before I could knock. Tony, you look like shit. Come on in. I didn't say much. I sat down at his kitchen table, put my phone on the table, and hit play. Tom listened quietly, a blank expression on his face as Amber's words echoed through the quiet room. I stayed at Tom's house for the next few days. I didn't answer Amber's calls or texts. At first, they came every few minutes or an hour. Her messages went from confused to worried to panicked. Asterisk, where are you, Anthony? Why aren't you answering me? I'm scared. Please come home. Asterisk, I deleted them all. I saw a lawyer those days. The divorce papers were drawn up quickly, and with each signature, our marriage moved one step closer to collapse. I didn't want to fight anymore. I just wanted to leave. Larry kept an eye on Amber. Through him, I learned that both Alex and Mike had cut her off. Alex blamed her for dragging him into a farce he didn't want to be a part of. Mike disappeared completely, leaving Amber to search for answers she would never get. She broke down. She called our mutual friends, went to places she thought I might go, and even went to Tom's house one night. Tom opened the door with his hands on his chest. I haven't seen Anthony in weeks, Amber. Go home. She left crying. Eventually, I knew she wouldn't be home, so I went back inside. The house was empty and hollow. Her perfume filled the air, but it couldn't mask the signs of the broken trust that filled every corner. I left the divorce papers on the kitchen table, along with a picture of her and Alex outside the hotel and a flash drive with recordings of her conversations with Karen. No messages, no explanations, just the evidence. Then I walked out and locked the door for the last time. The days passed in silence. I kept busy helping Tom with his garage, trying to occupy my mind with oil and metal instead of Amelie's voice echoing in my head. Then my phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen. Asterisk Amelie. Asterisk. I hesitated for a moment before picking up the phone. Her voice was broken and trembling. Anthony. Oh my God. Anthony, you're alive. Where have you been? Why have you disappeared? I'm in the hospital. They say I'm having a nervous breakdown. They've given me pills. Anthony, please, talk to me. Her sobs filled the silence, but they didn't move me. I felt empty. Amber, I said calmly, I know everything. I know about Alex. I know about Mike. I know about the fights, the lies, the games. I heard everything. I saw everything. It's over. The papers are on the table. Get ready for divorce. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. First a slight sob, then deathly silence. I hung up the phone and placed the receiver on the table. Tom sat opposite me, staring intently at me. He didn't say anything, and didn't need to. We understood each other. It's over, I said firmly. Tom nodded. You did what you had to do, Tony. The weight on my chest finally eased. The road ahead was long and hard, but at least I could walk it with my head held high. We sat in silence, staring at the tools and oil stains scattered across the garage floor. The worst was over. The divorce was next. A divorce was not just a legal procedure, it was a war. I was determined to win every battle. After all I'd been through, I couldn't just walk away. I had no intention of petty revenge or emotional catharsis. I wanted consequences, and I wanted them to echo in every corner of Amber's life. The first step was to build up my arsenal. I hired the best divorce lawyer I could find, a shrewd, calculating man known for beating his opponents in court. I handed the lawyer everything I had collected: photos of Amber and Alex together at the hotel, screenshots of her texts, recordings of her phone calls with Karen. Every piece of evidence was like a nail in her credibility. At first, Amber tried to contact me, but I didn't respond. She called, she texted, she even went to Tom's doorstep and cried. But I didn't want to hear any explanations or excuses. The day of our first court hearing arrived, and Amber walked into the courtroom expressionless and with a vacant stare. Her makeup could barely hide the tired look in her eyes, and she held her lawyer's arm, her hands trembling. But the evidence doesn't tremble. The evidence doesn't lie. When evidence is presented in court, the courtroom becomes cold and ruthless. The judge listens to the recordings expressionlessly, while Amber cringes in her seat. Clear, irrefutable photographs of her and Alex are circulated. Screenshots of her text messages are read aloud. She tries to speak, to explain, but her words are weak and fragmented, overwhelmed by the cold, merciless truth. The verdict was decisive and final. The house, the car, the joint accounts and assets, all awarded to me. Amber, on the other hand, was left with the debts of the failed business and nothing to fall back on. Her lawyer looked very dejected as he packed up his files and left the courtroom. In one day, Amber had lost everything. The life we had built together, the comfort and security she had taken for granted. It was all gone. But I'm not finished yet. Alex Haywood has played his part in this mess, and he won't get away unscathed. His career depends on his image: perfect, professional, and trustworthy. I know how to break that facade. I put together a file, A photo of him and Amber in a hotel, a copy of their statement, and a detailed timeline of their meetings. I anonymously sent these documents to the Human Resources Department of his consulting firm. The corporate culture had zero tolerance for scandals, especially when they involved personal relationships that undermined professional ethics. Within a week, Alex was fired. The official reason was personal misconduct, but anyone who knew the company knew what that really meant. His reputation was damaged, and the one he had built up over the years was permanently tarnished. Mike was easier to deal with. His weakness was his debt, and I exploited that. I found some of his old clients, people who were still angry about job mistakes and unpaid invoices. With the help of my lawyer, I helped them make serious legal claims. Mike was in a mess, drowning in lawsuits and unpaid bills. Eventually, he was forced to sell his garage to pay off his debts. When it was all over, Alex was unemployed, Mike was bankrupt, and Amber was living in a rundown rental apartment on the outskirts of town. She tried to rebuild her life, but rumors spread quickly in a small town. Employers refused to hire her, old friends didn't return her calls, and she became estranged from everyone. She wrote me letters, apologizing word for word, with tears in her eyes. She left me voice messages, her voice full of regret and despair. She even showed up at places she thought I might go, hoping to run into me. But I kept hiding, watching her fall apart from afar. Eventually, she gathered her dignity and left the city. I heard she moved to another city, a faraway place, to start a new life. But it's not easy to start over with a burden of wrongdoing. But despite the victory in court, despite Alex and Mike's downfall, despite Amber's total collapse, I felt no satisfaction, no joy in my victory, only emptiness. Revenge doesn't heal wounds, it only stops them from bleeding. After the dust settled, I was busy for weeks. I devoted all my energy to my garage and to machines that could not lie, cheat, or go back on their word. The Harley I had spent months building became my obsession. Every polished part and tightened bolt was a little bit of control in my out-of-control life. One night, I took a step back and looked at the finished motorcycle. It was beautiful, a restored machine that symbolized resilience and craftsmanship. I felt like it was finally over. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and let the spirit warm me from the inside out. The garage was quiet, except for the soft crackle of the cigarette between my fingers and the hum of passing traffic in the distance. I walked over to the old stereo on the shelf and turned the knob, filling the room with the familiar sound of classic rock. The music flooded in, and I smiled, the first time I had done so in my life. The war was over. This chapter was closed. I was free.